Shalom, everyone. As many of you know, that we did an update on the storm last night, and we had intended to broadcast live stream last night, but everything has been turned upside down to here. And for instance, one of the problems that we're going to have to compensate for today is I'm using a microphone that is not the regular microphone that I use. So the volume might fluctuate from time to time because with this microphone it doesn't follow my head. So please bear with us. But I want to go into a continuation of what we were talking about before concerning whether or not the temple was down at the city of David or whether in fact it was on the Temple Mount. Now, the two books that we are really working from that put forth the theory that it's down at the city of David is The Temples That Jerusalem Forgot by Ernest Martin. Came out in the year 2000. In the year 2010, by Robert Cordu, Could History Be So Stunningly Wrong? Temple, Amazing New Discoveries That Change Everything About the Lesson of Solomon's Temple. And this is that book. So, why is this so serious? I mean, they present what sounds to be very good reasons why people would want it to be there. For instance, you don't have the conflict with the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. The Muslims could have their place, and then there's God's temple. It would satisfy everyone. And that sounds great. And that sounds fantastic. But the reality is that the role of the Jewish people, they were chosen by God. They were set apart by God. That through the Jewish people, that the scriptures would come to the people as well as the understandings of those scriptures. And when you start to say, well, the temple wasn't there, the books will come out to say they were lost. They lost them, and the Jewish people have been rogue about all of this, and the archaeologists have been rogue. Everybody's been rogue. Well, I would equate this with the scripture itself, because if you can take away the credibility of the scripture, then you take away the credibility of the faith. And if you take away the role of the Jewish people, and if you start to chip away at that, you diminish it, you bring it down, eventually you have anything goes and everything goes. And so it is not just a matter of the location and the restoration of the temple, it's a matter for the entire faith. Now, we had talked about the Fortress Antonia. And I want to go to the map first. I've got a tremendous amount of pictures. Now, a lot of these are going to be repeat pictures, but we're going to look at detail of the area. Now, here is where some of the various scholars would say that the Antonia was located, was right at this little corner here, this being the southern wall of the Antonia, this being the northern wall, and coming forth, this would be the Struthian Pool. Now, others purport that it comes down into the Temple Mount. We're going to see models that have been built of this. And when we come down, we have, of course, a key feature is what we call the fosse, the moat, the ditch, which is going to be on this map. It's given by these lines right here. And I'm going to actually show you some of Charles Ward's original drawings that he did. These are not published. These are ones that I took photographs of when I was in London at the Palestine Exploration Fund. Now, we're going to read the text of Josephus. We're going to look at a tremendous amount of information that we have. So first, I want to go to some of the text. And we have a number of a number of references here. All of these are going to be out of the Jewish Wars. This is going to be the Loeb edition, the Jewish Wars. This is volumes 5 through 7. And our first, actually, I cannot do the first one from here. I didn't bring it with me. Josephus is at my house. But this is going to be from Book 2, paragraph 331. It says they cooled the avarice of Florus. Now, Florus was the Roman ruler that was occupying Jerusalem. And let me go ahead here. It says, this called the avarice of Florus, for whereas he was eager to obtain the treasures of God in the temple, and on that account was desirous of getting into Antonia, as soon as the cloisters were broken down, he stopped his attempt. He then sent for the high priest and the Sanhedrin, and told them that he was indeed himself going out of the city, but that he would leave them as large a garrison as they should desire. Now, this is before the actual outbreak, the start of the war. I'm going to go to Book 2, paragraph 4-3. It says, to which Agrippa replied that they had already done, that what they had already done was like such as make war against the Romans. This is where that they have taken over the Antonia. They have refused to offer the peace offerings in honor of the emperor. For you have not paid the tribute which is due to Caesar, and you have cut off the cloisters of the temple from joining to the tower of Antonia. All right, so we're going to go forward. This is all building up to the actual revolt, and this is going to be in Book 2, paragraph 430. But on the next day, which was the 15th of the month Louis, which is the 15th of Ab, they made an assault upon Antonia, besieged the garrison, which was in it for 2 days, and then took the garrison and slew them and set the citadel on fire. Okay, so we're going to go forward from there. And now we'll be in Book 5, which I can read from the Loeb. We've been reading from the Winston translation. This is going to be from Book 5, paragraph 146. Now there'll be some descriptions as we go through here. In paragraph 146, it says the second wall. He's describing the three walls. In fact, let me go back up to paragraph 142. He's talking about Jerusalem. Jerusalem, by the time the revolt began in 66 Common Era, had three walls. Well, the first wall was built by Solomon. The second wall was built in the Second Temple period, in the late First Temple period by Hezekiah, by others. Then we have the third wall, which was built by Agrippa II. Of the three walls, the most ancient, owing to the surrounding ravines and the hill above them on which it was reared, was well nigh impregnable. But besides the advantage of its position, it was also strongly built. David and Solomon and their successors on the throne having taken pride in the work. Beginning on the north at the tower called Hippicus, it extended to the Xystos and then joined the council chamber. Terminated at the western portico of the temple. Beginning at the same point in the other direction, westward, it descended past the place called Betsos to the gate of the Essenes. Then turned southwards above the fountain of Siloam. Thence it again inclined to the east towards Solomon's pool, and after passing a spot which they called Ophelis. Now, Ophelis, we read this last week, is the Ophel. Finally joined the eastern portico of the temple. So right there it shows you that the temple is going to be north of the Ophel. The second wall started from the gate in the first wall, which they called Ganat, and enclosing only the northern district of the town, went up as far as the Tower of Antonia. Then he goes on to describe the third wall that went around the city. And we're going to move forward rather quickly. We're going to go to paragraph 149. And I'm going to start at the latter part of 147. It says, this wall was built by Agrippa to enclose the later additions to the city, which were quite unprotected. This is going to be Bethesda. For the town overflowed with inhabitants had gradually crept beyond the ramparts. Indeed, the population uniting to the hill, the district north of the temple, had encroached so far that even a fourth hill was surrounded with houses. This hill, which is called Bethesda, lay opposite Antonia, but was cut off from it by a deep fosse dug on purpose to sever the foundations of Antonia from the hill, and so to render them at once less easy of access and more elevated. The depth of the trench materially increasing the height of the towers. The recently built quarter was called in the vernacular Bethesda, which might be translated to Greek as New Town. And it's going to go forward. But let's stop right here and let's go back to our map. And we have this is what we would believe, or what would be seen as the northern wall of the Temple Mount. And I would definitely agree with that, but I believe that the Antonia was located here, as we've already spoken of, that in coming down to as far as the fosse, coming back up. Now, you can see from the contour, we have along here, this is the Bethesda Valley coming through here, and so the hill starts to come up from this point. Now, this is what we call the Birkat Israel, the Pool of Israel. The Birkat Israel is usually drawn, seen. It's many models associated with the temple, but in reality, the Pool of Israel, the Birkat Israel, we believe was built during the time of Hadrian. The stonework that is there is from a later period. The masonry is not as precise as what we have in the Herodian period, the temple period, and Josephus himself never once mentions the Pool of Israel, the Birkat Israel. So this moat would have been in this particular area in order to protect Antonia from the community of Bethesda, which is going to be out in this area. Okay, so we'll go forward from here. And we're going to go to 183. 183. All right. I'm going to start in 176. Adjoining of the inner side of these towers. Now, the towers, let's see, adjoining of the inner side of these towers, which lay to the north of it, was the king's palace, baffling all description. Indeed, in extravagance and equipment, no building surpassed it. It was completely enclosed with a wall 30 cubits high, broken in equal distances by ornamental towers, and contained immense banqueting halls, bedchambers for 100 guests. This is Herod's palace on the western side of the city, by the Joppa Gate. The interior fittings are indescribable. The variety of the stones for species rare in every other country were here collected in abundance. Ceilings wonderful both for the length of the beams and the splendor of their surface decoration. The host of apartments with their infinite varieties of design, all amply furnished, while most of all the objects in each of them were of silver or gold. All around were many circular cloisters, leading one into another, the columns in each being different, and their open courts all of greensward. Not sure what that is. There were groves of various trees, intersected by long walks, which were bordered by deep canals and ponds, everywhere studded with bronze figures, through which the water was discharged, and around the streams were numerous cots for tame pigeons. However, it is impossibly adequate to delineate the palace in the memory of its herring, recalling as it does the ravages of the brigands' fire. For it was not the Romans who burned it to the ground, but this was done, as we have said already, by conspirators within the walls at the opening of the revolt. The conflagration beginning at Antonia passed to the palace and spread to the roofs of the three towers. Okay, so we're going to go forward from that to 192. In 192, we're going to start at 190. Nor was the superstructure on more than such foundations. The porticos, all in double rows, were supported by columns 5 and 20 cubits high. This is talking about the temple, the outer courts. Each a single block of the purest white marble and sealed with panels of cedar. The natural magnificence of these columns, their excellent polish and fine adjustment, presented a striking spectacle without any advantageous embellishment of painting or sculpture. The porticos were 30 cubits broad, and the complete circuit of them, embracing the Tower of Antonia, measured 6 furlongs, or 6 stadia. Okay, so a stadia is going to be 100 yards plus. The opening court was from end to end, variegated with pavings of all manners of stones. Okay, so we're going to go forward from there and quite a ways. We're going to go to Book 5, paragraph 238. And this is where we're going to start to get we're going to get to the really important information on the Antonia. The Tower of Antonia lay at an angle where two porticos, the western and the northern of the first court of the temple, met. It was built upon a rock 50 cubits high and on all sides precipitous. It was the work of King Herod. Now, let's stop here. I'm going to draw. We're going to have the Antonia is going to have this area. We're going to distinguish this. We're going to have the Strathian pool here. And because Strathian pool would be this pool. Then it's going to come down and possibly even extend it out further along these lines and basically be a fortress like this. So we're going to have the porticos of the temple. This would be our western portico. It would come in here like this, and we're going to have the northern portico coming here, and our eastern portico, with our inner courtyards Okay, so we're going to have a building here, here, have a building here, temple building, altar, have a building here, building here. We're going to have a plaza, and a plaza. We'll have gates here, 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 here. We'll have a gate here, 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 here. Gate here, here. And then on the east, we have the 3 gates. Okay, that is your inner courtyard. Then your court of the women will be down here. Okay. We'll have a gate in here, here, and here. All right. Now, this is how I understand these porticos to be, where they come on the western portico, the northern portico is going to butt the Antonia as well as the western portico. It is where these two come together. Okay, so the Tower of Antonia lay at the angle where 2 porticos, the western and the northern, of the first court of the temple met. It was built upon a rock 50 cubits high, which we call Antonia Hill, and on the sides precipitous. It was the work of King Herod, and a crowning exhibition of the innate grandeur of his genius. For to begin with, the rock was covered from its base upwards with smooth flagstones, both for ornament and in order that anyone attempting to ascend or descend it might slip off. So basically what we're going to have is what we call a glacis. So here we have our fortress, but we're going to have a base that comes like this. If you want to see a classic example of this, I can't show you an example now, but to look at Herodian. And these are going to be polished stone. No one can ascend, they would slip off. And so let's write on here glacis, Glacis, and that's part of its protection. Okay, so next, in front of the actual edifice, there was a wall 3 cubits high. Behind that, the Tower of Antonia rose majestic to an altitude of 40 cubits. Now remember, that's 40 cubits above the hill that it sits on. The interior resembled a palace in its spaciousness and appointments, being divided into apartments of every description for every purpose, including cloisters, baths, and broad courtyards for the accommodation of troops, so that from its possession of all conveniences, it seemed a town. From its magnificence, a palace. Okay? So here's one of the complaints, and I would agree with them on this point. If you have that the Antonia is only this small section here at the top, and here you can see it right here, and notice all these numbers. These numbers are going to be significant because they indicate cisterns, but you have, if it's only this area, it doesn't seem to fit the description that Josephus gave. But the impression they give is that everybody believes it's only this small section. And we're going to see many models, many different drawings that have been done down through the last 100 years, 150 years, that show that many scholars saw that it came down into this area. Okay, so we're going to go forward here. It says, the general appearance of the whole was that of a tower, with other towers at each of the 4 corners. Okay, so we're going to have towers at the 4 corners. All right, so let's put those in. Towers at the 4 corners. And there's a possibility that these would be rather up here. And that's what I would actually believe. And I want to put a word here. Which is keep. Okay, so We'll go forward. All right. Three of these turrets were 50 cubits high, while that at the southeast angle rose to 70 cubits high. So this is going to be our highest tower that's extended up above. So we're going to have 40 cubits, then we're going to have towers that will be above this. So it's going to be of a huge height. Okay, so and so commanded a view of the whole area of the temple. At the point where it impinged upon the porticos of the temple, there were stairs leading down to both of them, by which the guards descended, for a Roman cohort was permanently quartered. Now, they will say that this is wrong. It doesn't actually say a Roman cohort, but rather it should be a Roman legion. A cohort is between 500 and 600 men, whereas a legion is between 5,000 and 6,000 men. Okay? The normal or the regular garrison of the Antonia Tower was a cohort. You have to remember this. Jerusalem was not the Roman headquarters for the region. Caesarea Maritima was the regional headquarters, with the supreme headquarters in Damascus. And so we have, this is going to be one of the more important outposts, but not the center command area. We have, for a Roman cohort was permanently quartered there, and at the festivals took up positions in arms around the porticos to watch the people repress any insurrectory movement. For if the temple lay as a fortress of the city, Antonia dominated the temple. And the occupants of that post were the guards of all there. The upper town had its own fortress, Herod's palace. The hill Bezetha was, as I said, cut off from Antonia, the highest of all the hills. It was encroached on by part of the new town and formed on the north the only obstruction to the view of the temple. As I propose hereafter to give a fuller and more circumstantial description of the temple and the walls, these remarks shall for the present suffice. Okay, so we're going to go down to quite a distance. We're going to go to Book 5, paragraph 260. I'm going to start at 259. Such being the situation within the walls, Titus with some picked cavalry made a tour of inspection without to select a spot against which to direct his attack. Baffled at all other points, the ravines rendering access impossible, while beyond them the first wall seemed too solid for his engines. He decided to make the assault opposite the tomb of John, the high priest, for here the first line of ramparts was on lower ground, and the second was disconnected with it, the builders having neglected to fortify the sparsely populated portions of the new town, while there was an easy approach to the third wall, through which his intention was to capture the upper town, and so by way of Antonia, the temple. Now this becomes important. In other words, he has a plan of taking the temple from the fortress Antonia. And that's going to be very important as we go along. Okay, so we're going to go now to, we're going to read just a little bit more out of 267. It says, but John, through his followers, was impatient for an encounter with the enemy outside from fear of Shimon, did not stir. Shimon, however, being near the besiegers, was not inactive, but posted his artillery upon the ramparts, both the engines which they had formerly taken from Cestius, and those captured when they overpowered the garrison of Antonia. Okay, so they have the equipment from the Antonia they're going to be using. We're going to go to paragraph 304. in 304, I'm going to start in 303. Titus now shifted his camp within the first wall to the so-called camp of the Assyrians, occupying all the ground between it and the Kidron, but keeping far enough back to be out of bowshot from the second wall, which he fortified, proceeding to attack. The Jews divided their forces, maintained a stubborn defense from the ramparts, John's division fighting from Antonia, from the north portico of the temple, and in front of the tomb of King Alexander, while Shimon's troops occupied the approach, alongside the tomb of Yochanan the high priest, and manned the wall as far as the gate, through which water was conveyed to the Hippicus Tower. Okay, so we're going to go forward from here to 356. And in 356, we'll start getting into the fight for the Antonia. In 4 days, the several Roman legions had all received their pay. On the fifth, no overtures for peace having come from the Jews, Titus formed the legion into two divisions and began raising earthworks opposite Antonia and Yochanan's monument, respectively. His design being to carry the upper town at the latter point and the temple by way of Antonia. So again, it mentions that he plans to use the Antonia for his launching of his attack on the temple. For unless the temple were secured, to hold even the town would be precarious. The erection of two banks in each of these two quarters was accordingly begun, one being assigned to each legion. Those that work alongside the monument were impeded by sallies of the Idumeans and the troops of Shimon. Those before Antonia suffered obstruction from Yochanan's followers and the zealots. Their adversaries, moreover, were successful, not only with hand missiles owing to superiority of position, but also with their engines, which they had now learnt to use, daily practice having gradually fostered their skill. It goes into the artillery that the defenders of the Antonia, the Jewish defenders, were using. We're going to drop down to we're going to go quite a ways to 467. In 467, I'm going to start in 466. So the Romans had begun their earthworks on the 12th of the month Artemisius. They were scarcely completed on the 29th after 17 days of continuous toil. For the four embankments were immense. The first two that at Antonia were thrown up by the 5th Legion over against the middle of the pool called Struthian. Okay, so the Struthian pool is going to be this pool right here. The other by the 12th Legion, about 20 cubits away. The 10th Legion, at a considerable distance from these, was employed in the northern region and over against the pool turned Armagedon, okay, which is over by the Jaffa Gate. While 30 cubits from them, the 15th were at work opposite the high priest's monument. But while the engines were now being brought up, Yochanan from within had undermined the ground from Antonia right up to the earthworks, supporting the tunnels with props, and thus leaving the Roman work suspended. Having then introduced timber besmeared with pitch and bitumen, he set the whole mass alight. The props being consumed, the mine collapsed in a heap, and with a tremendous crash the earthworks fell in. At first, dense volumes of smoke arose with clouds of dust, the fire being smothered by the debris. But as the material which crushed it was eaten away, a vivid flame now burst forth. The Romans were in consternation at this sudden, catastrophic, and dispirited, catastrophe and dispirited by the enemy's ingenuity. Moreover, coming at the monument which they imagined victory within their grasp, the casualty damped their hopes of ultimate success. It seemed useless to fight the flames when, even if they were extinguished, their earthworks were overwhelmed. Let me check my next reference here. We're going to drop down to paragraph 486. In 486, but now Titus appeared from Antonia. So we have that the Romans have captured the Antonia. But now Titus appeared from Antonia, whither he had gone to inspect the site for fresh earthworks, severely reprimanding his troops for having well mastered the enemy's fortifications, thus jeopardized their own and put themselves in the position of the besieged by letting loose the Jews upon them from their prison house. He then, with his picked force himself at their head, got round and took the enemy in flank. But though attacked in front as well, they turned and resolutely withstood him. In the melody of the fight, blinded by the dust and deafened by the din, neither side could any longer distinguish friend from foe. We're going to go forward from here to book 5, paragraph 523. In 523, all right, so for all the trees around the city having been felled for the previous works, the troops had to collect fresh material from a distance of 90 furlongs. The new mounds were raised only opposite Antonia in 4 sections and were much larger than the former embankments. Caesar, meanwhile, making the round of the legions and expediting operations, plainly showed the brigands that they were now in his hands. All right, we're going to see if we can drop down. Yes, we're going to book 6. And we're going to paragraph 23. Of the retreat of the Jews, the Romans brought up the sieges, being assailed from Antonia with rocks, fire, iron, and every species of missile which with necessity supplied the Jews, who, notwithstanding their confident reliance on the ramparts and their contempt of the engines, yet strove to prevent the Romans from bringing them up. The latter, surmising that the anxiety of the Jews to save Antonia from assault arose from some weakness in the wall, and hoping that the foundations were rotten, redoubled their efforts. And I said wrong a few minutes ago. I said that at this point they had captured the Antonia. This is still the Roman attack on the Antonia to retake the fortress. Nevertheless, it resisted the batterings, but the Romans, under incessant fire and undeterred by the perils to which they were exposed from above, brought the siege engines effectively into action. As, however, they were at a disadvantage and crushed by the boulders, another party locking their bucklers over their bodies with hands and crowbars, started undermining the foundations, and by perseverance succeeded in dislodging 4 stones. Night suspended the labors of both combatants, but in the course of it, the wall, whose shaking by the rams was followed by the collapse of the mine, at the point where Yochanan and his designs of the former earthworks had dug beneath it, suddenly fell to the ground. The effect of this incident on the spirits of the both belligerents was surprising, for the Jews, who might reasonably have been disheartened by it, were in consequence of their being prepared for this catastrophe and having taken precautions to meet it, quite confident, as Antonia still remained, whereas the unlooked-for joy of the Romans at the downfall was extinguished by the appearance of the second wall, which Yochanan and his party had built within. In other words, within the Antonia. True, the assault of this one looked easier than that of the first, as the ascent would be facilitated by the debris. They also imagined the wall itself to be far weaker than that of Antonia, and that, being a temporary structure, it would be rapidly destroyed. Still none ventured to mount, for manifest destruction awaited the first assailants. We're going to stop here. We'll take a break. Be right back.